Hello, everyone, and warm welcome to our today's conference, Give Youth a Chance. I hope that all of you are well connected and ready for today's discussions. Before we continue, and on the very beginning, I would like to remind you that this meeting has translation to the languages of the region enabled, so please choose your preferred one at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Also, I would kindly like to ask you to use the chat feature for questions to the panelists, and we will try to address them during today's event. I am Ognjen Markovic, project expert of the RCC's Western Balkan Youth Lab, and will be moderating some of today's discussions. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank you for your time to join us in discussing the position of the Western Balkan youth on the labor market. We are happy to see that today's conference Give Youth a Chance gathered our partners, representatives of the ministries of labor and other ministries in charge of labor and youth issues in the region, but also representatives from the EU Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, our guests and dear partners, International Labour Organization and European Training Foundation, and last but certainly not the least, members of the regional pool of experts consisted of equal number of youth and policymakers working on the first ever regional youth policy lab on youth and employment. Here I would like to give the floor to my colleague and team leader of the Regional Cooperation Council's Employment and Social Affairs Platform Project, Ms. Amira Ramhorst, who actually gathered us today. Amira, thank you, and I'm giving the floor to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Ognjen. Good morning, all dear participants across Western Balkan economies and also representatives from the European Commission, DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, and of course our partners, ILO and ETF, and also all our researchers who contributed to this report. I am delighted to be this morning the co-host of this event, and I know we have a lot of exciting topics ahead of us, and they cannot certainly wait. So without further ado, I would invite to the floor Madam Secretary General of the RCC. Madam Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. So dear ladies and gentlemen, dear partners of RCC and our SAP2 and Youth Lab project from the region and the EU. The first reason why I'm pretty glad is that although we have some different projects like satelliting the RCC core agenda, all of those merging together lead to one direction on how to make the situation in the region better. And I'm pretty glad that I see that today we have one of those activities where both projects are coming together, discussing one of the most important and prominent issues that the region is facing. So dear young women of the Western Balkans as well that are here together with us, it's a pleasure to see you all. And again, so it's Monday, so I hope that you'll have a lot to discuss during the rest of the week on youth, women situation, economic empowerment, and the social problems. So all in all, the human capital of the Western Balkans. Although I would really prefer to start and finish this intervention of mine with a smile. The data that we'll hear today on youth employment in the region are not so bright. And the meetings like this, bringing together the policymakers and the policy users, the youth, I am confident that if not by today, at least in the near future can lead to better solutions. Youth and jobs has never, let's say, been a great combination in the Western Balkans. The biggest problems, and let's say the first target group who always emphasizes as a big problem the employment, are always the people coming from young generations, so youngsters. For Western Balkans economies, youth unemployment has been doubled the general unemployment, and much higher than in the EU. Last year, marked by COVID-19 pandemic crisis, was particularly difficult job-wise worldwide. And I can imagine that you know that these difficulties fall upon and endanger mostly the life of the weakest. So in the Western Balkans, the situation is even more dangerous, I would call it. The pandemic has stopped job creation, affecting severely job prospects of young people, especially those who hadn't had a secure job when the crisis struck. But if we see the numbers, and now I'm referring to the ESAP observatory that Amira and her team has brilliantly put, let's say, into action, we'll see that the low employment rates in the region and the sizable gender gap are pretty much worrisome. I would suggest that you all go and have a look on the observatory. I'll just give you some of those numbers. In last year, so during 2020, youth employment in the region was 19.8%, and compared to 31.4% for the EU member states, EU 27, you will see that it's like half. There is a sizable gender gap where employment rates for young women average at 14.5 against those of young men at 24.8. Western Balkans, even that being a region where women mostly outshine men, starting from young women as students, when it comes to employment, men are definitely having not only better jobs, but they are part of the labor market for more than 1 million than women. Nearly 1/4 or 24% of young persons in the Western Balkans is neither in employment nor in education training in so-called needs. So this poorly compares with the 11.1% of the EU. Pandemic, as everywhere, deteriorated the situation the most. The social, the mental problems, mental distress are just like the tip point of the iceberg. Besides the measures that the governments have taken and still need to take to save jobs, there was a 30% increase in the registered unemployed youth in the period from February to December 2020. So all this will have a long run effect. Young people in the region, apart from those who, I have to say, unfortunately, left the region, emigrated, and we see that there is still a high percentage of those that are looking forward to do that. But those that are in the region are like not in employment, not in education. Some of them lack those skills that are mostly needed for the labor market. Others are dropping out of the labor market entirely, limiting their ability to lift themselves out of the poverty line or contribute effectively to the economy. We noticed as well a mismatch of demand versus offer on the youth employment market. According to the data of the Balkan Barometer of this year, 2021, yet to be published by RCC, 62% of the young people say that inadequate employment opportunities are one of the biggest problems that they face. Whilst according to the employers struggle to find workers for two key reasons: lack of skills and emigration that I mentioned. What do we need to do? First, I keep repeating and saying it everywhere. The responsibility goes directly to the policymakers of each economy of the region. Those are the ones who get votes. So those are the ones who have a political mandate to change the situation. Although through difficulties that we are all aware of. a lot of and all the economies in the region are not reached. So the budget is never enough. But whenever that rhetoric that youth is the future is present in all the speeches that you hear from politicians, VIP persons, think tankers, I think, and we are sure, it's not only my opinion, that the responsibility first has to be shouldered by the governments of the region. On the other side, what we all together can do to help change the situation is to prioritize the youth skills development to minimize their unemployment. And nowhere anybody is, at least during the last years, if it's not Bill Gates, I don't think that anybody has to come with such an idea or to reinvent the wheel, but rather make a vehicle using those available wheels, measures, and tools that we have in our hands. Since 2013, the European Union introduced Youth Guarantee as a platform for all the young people under the age of 30 to receive a good quality offer to employment, continued education, traineeship with a period of 4 months of becoming unemployed or leaving education. The impact is tangible in 7 years. 1.7 million young people, neither in employment nor in education and training across the EU, and the youth unemployment in EU fell to a record low of 14.9% in February last year. Again, this region is in dead earnest need for investments, funds to develop the agendas of connectivity, to upskill people and prepare them for the labor market in an area where mostly the work and the jobs will be like digitalized. We do have an economic and investment plan for Western Balkans that was introduced and launched last year by European Commission, that highlighted in as well the support on implementation of the Youth Guarantee in the Western Balkans. And this Youth Guarantee scheme, maybe it's not the only one, but it is still a vehicle that together with youth, it can work in trying to shape for better our economies. At RCC, we are partners in these endeavors, and whatever it's up to us, we'll never shy of the responsibility, and we'll put all our efforts to make the situation different. On another note, we are also ready to provide the thematic and that expertise support through our ESAP and youth projects, such as today's study with its whole policy roadmap. So by the end of this intervention of mine, I would like to thank our government partners for their feedback and inputs on this study and the roadmaps. Your contributions were most valuable, while I hope this ESAP study with its roadmaps for Youth Guarantee will be a useful input, and it will serve as well and help you all for the implementation plans for the Youth Guarantee, which are quite of critical need and importance. That's all from my side. I wish you all success in your work. I would like to commend as well the work of our ESAP team and the Youth Lab project. You see that even during the pandemic, one of the things that we were never, let's say, short of is trying to have a clear reading from a regional perspective. So as I mentioned, for the first time, for everybody, be a politician, somebody working in the public administration, a journalist as well, you have the chance to check the data, make a comparison through our ESAP observatory, and not only. So whenever you'll need a clear perspective from the region, it's better to have the full reading from different angles and perspectives. Last week we launched the security matters, so the challenges that people and young people mostly in the region are facing when it comes to security, be it online radicalization, be it fake news, or be one of the threats of having and owning a gun, and all these big problems of organized crime that are still present and let's say one of the most worrisome factors in the region. We'll launch by mid-June the new Balkan barometer. So please stay tuned, and let's see whatever we can do, not only, as I said, to have a readout from the region, but by having this data and these facts, at least it can really spark or convince everybody that the situation has to be changed, starting immediately from those needs that are quite pertinent for the Western Balkans. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General, for these very important remarks, and also for your passion for data and support for our teams. Thank you also for your energy and commitment and passion for employment issues and youth employment, and your call for action. So thank you this morning for joining us. I am pleased and honored that today we are also joined by the Director of the European Commission, Director General of Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Director Quirrell is this morning with us. I am hoping that we can see you in the Zoom icon. I see that you are registered. So good morning, Director Quirrell, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I hope that you can see me and hear me. I am really very pleased to welcome you along with Secretary General Mailinda Brejo to this important webinar on the youth employment in the Western Balkans. And I would like also to commend the whole of the staff in the Regional Cooperation Council, but more particularly the project manager, yourself, Amira Ramford, Mr. Will Barnett, and of course all the country experts, which have prepared this, I think, important and indeed very valuable study, without which, without your expertise, it would have not been possible. And I also welcome you, all of those representatives of the Western Balkan government who will contribute, I'm sure, with their active participation to today's event. And unhappily, we are still in this second year of the pandemic. And even if live face-to-face contacts are much better, but I think that we are all getting to be experts in these webinars and making a success out of them. I would say that the title of this seminar is really very well chosen, because it's called, as you all know, Give You a Chance. So it is indeed about that. And we were told by the Secretary General that the situation of youth in the Western Balkans is not the best. I mean, we got some very clear figures, and unhappily, we can see that there are a high number of needs, and youth unemployment rates are pretty high as well. I'm not pretending to say that in the European Union we are doing everything right with youth, right? Because indeed we also have problems. But it seems to me, as it was reminded to us by the Secretary General, that the situation in the Western Balkans is particularly difficult. And I think that we would all agree that a society that does not bring hope to its youth, a society that does not offer opportunities to its youth, is a society without future. And that's why I think that this seminar is very important. And in order to make this seminar more fruitful and to allow for outcomes in terms of designing policies, which don't need to be fundamentally new. We were reminded about the importance of a well-functioning wheel. We don't need to reinvent wheels every other day, but it is important that we bring together all the tools that we have in order to make a success out of that. And let me explain very briefly, because of course all of you know it perfectly well, what we from the European Union side do to support this tackling this issue of youth unemployment in your countries. And again, you will see that there are no new wheels, but I think that what is important is the combination of the different tools that we have at our disposal. First of all, we have a policy-making level. And you all know that we have this cycle of what we call the economic reform programs, which is every year. We also adopted the regional approach, which I think is very complementary to the bilateral one. And I think, as it was reminded to us as well, it is important for each of you, for each of your governments, to take into account not just your national situation, but the context in which this national situation is placed, and therefore the region of the Western Balkans. And through these economic reform programs, every year, which is a replication of what we call in our EU jargon, the European semester, every year we have a joint analysis on the issues that should be addressed by each individual country within this region in order to bring their economies to a higher level, and therefore increasing the well-being of its citizens. And then this is done in a very collegial manner. So it's not us having an assessment on your plans. This is done jointly with you. And at the end of the day, there are recommendations, country-specific recommendations, or joint conclusions, which are adopted both by the EU, so the Commission, the Member States, and you as well. And this is what I think is important. And you will have noticed that this year there was an across-the-board recommendation, that is to say a regional one, so to speak, which urged your countries to improve vocational education and training, as of course this has a big potential to alleviate youth unemployment. And of course we have also proposed to step up active labor market policies for the activation of young people. I guess we could say, and this is most likely a sentence that all of us are familiar with, is that we have to, this pandemic has had numbing effects on our economies, on all of us. It has been particularly cruel with vulnerable groups, amongst which young people, of course. And I think that now that we have to build back, we certainly need to build back better. So that would be the first element, the policy making level. Then, of course, we have, and again, I'm happy to see that the Secretary General already referred to it, we have the financing tool. And you all know that through the IPA, the Instrument for Pre-Accession 3, there is a flagship initiative which is modeled along the EU Youth Guarantee. And again, I think that this EU Youth Guarantee has been a success at European level. I'm not pretending that there is no youth unemployment in Europe, in the European Union. I would never say that, of course, but I would tend to think that indeed there is this initiative, which is all-encompassing, has been useful and effective in helping and supporting individual member states' efforts when tackling youth unemployment. And indeed, it has not only contributed to improve the situation of young people, but it has also been a powerful driver for long-term structural reforms, and that's what I think we are talking about here. So again, we have done that, and let's say that we have wanted to share this instrument, of which we have experienced its effectiveness with you, with your countries. So let me finish very briefly by a very quick outlook of the political framework, both in the EU and in the Western Balkans. You all know that in 2017, the EU adopted the European Pillar of Social Rights, and that in 2018, as soon as that, the Western Balkans minister in charge of social policy have also committed themselves to using the pillar in order to further promote reforms in the employment and social area. And we have been at our level, we have moved one step further, I would say. And recently in Porto, some weeks, a month ago, the European Union has decided to go beyond the principles and to adopt what we call a European Pillar of Social Rights action plan with concrete steps in order to implement the principle. I will not get into the detail because that's not the purpose of the seminar, of course, but what I think is important is that the starting point of that is that the implementation of the pillar principles is not a matter of one single institution. It's a matter of everybody. And then this means that it's a matter of the European level, no doubt. It's a matter of funding from the European level. It's about legislative initiatives from the European level, but it's also a matter for national and regional governments, no doubt, because in many areas, the competences locally lay within national and regional governments. And it's not only a matter for public authorities or public administration. It's also a matter for social partners. There are things that are best done through public initiatives, but there are things which are best led for social partners to decide, or of course, even if with a different role for the civil society at large. So I think that this is very important to keep this context in mind. So I will stop here because I think that what's important for all of us today is to discuss on the topic, to discuss on this very important study that has been carried out. And I would like to thank you for your attention and of course wish you a very good and productive meeting. Thank you very much.
Director Curl, thank you very much for your remarks, and thank you for the support of your teams who have supported our project team in this study with their expertise and guidance. And the way that you have highlighted a combination of different tools, whether we're talking about financing tools and the policy, also the importance regional perspective versus bilateral perspective. And then finally, and also very important, to look at the long-term societal outcomes and the partnership with the social partners. So thank you for your remarks this morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. As both of our speakers this morning highlighted the importance of partnership between the authorities and broader partners in the society. So this morning, we're delighted again that we're joined by the representatives of the Western Balkan governments across all Western Balkan economies, but that we're also joined by the representatives of different youth organizations, across the Western Balkans. And I know you work very closely with them. I'm going to take a few seconds just to briefly share the agenda with you today. If you haven't looked at the agenda, it's a packed agenda, a lot of interesting data and presentations. We're going to delve into the youth study. The lead editor and analyst, Professor William Bartlett, and myself. After that, we will have the opportunity to hear feedback. We're going to have the opportunity to hear feedback or actually reflections, not only on our presentations, but most importantly on the experience of North Macedonia. And we're delighted that we have Mr. Georgi Tasev from North Macedonia government to share this experience with all of us and our partners. Then we're going to have a chance to hear reflections from our government partners across economies. And then certainly last and not the least, we're going to hear the voices of youth. So without further ado, I would invite us all to put our data listening modes and get ready for getting into the details of our youth employment study. Good morning. I hope you all see my screen, our presentation of the study on youth employment. And as I said, we're going to, in the next half an hour, we're going to focus on this presentation. But before I go to the formal presentation part, let me say that this study has been completed with the inputs of a number of experts from all 6 Western Balkan economies. I will not read them. I can read them all right now, but if you download the study at ESAP webpage, you can read all their names, and has benefited greatly from the lead analyst and editor contribution, Professor William Bartlett from the London School of Economics. I'll just quickly read the experts: Susanna Gujoli, Manuela Zacellari, Lidiana Beshaj, Pancho Jovanovski, Dragan Bjelica, Radovan Stojanovic, Almir Peštek, Hatidža Jahić, and Sejdi Sejdiu. As I've said, from all the 6 Western Balkan economies. Our lead editor and analyst, Professor William Bartlett. In writing this study, we've also reached out to all our partners across Western Balkan economies, and they have greatly improved with their feedback and their contributions to the study, for which I am greatly grateful. So what are we going to, today's presentation is going to be by myself and Professor Bartlett, but as I've said, a number of people have contributed to this study and its findings, and also the amazing ESSAP team. So today's presentation will focus on following elements: youth labor markets, which I will cover, key challenges, youth employment policies in place, NEET policies and PES capacities, and youth guarantees. It's a lot to cover, and I hope you will stay with us throughout the whole process. As I said, the first part of the presentation will focus on key labor market trends. And some of these trends you have already heard, so I will try to go rather quickly through most of the slides that are on this level. But let me share the first slide that focuses on the youth unemployment. And I think you've definitely heard from Secretary General quite a bit of data about youth unemployment. But if we look at this slide, what I want to point out is that youth unemployment rates fell between 2017 and 2019. But even in this period, they were still exceptionally high throughout the Western Balkans. And in all economies, they were far above the EU 27 average rate. If we look at the 2020, the average regional youth unemployment rate is 35.1%, which is almost exactly the double of the youth unemployment rate. We see that the youth unemployment rates above the regional average. So if we look at the regional average of 35.1%, we see that there are economies that are above this regional average, and this is Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, now Montenegro, thanks to COVID, and North Macedonia, with an exceptionally difficult situation in Kosovo at almost 3 times the average unemployment rate than in the EU. As we can see, for 2020, youth unemployment rates have begun to rise in Bosnia-Herzegovina and in Montenegro in response to the economic effects of the COVID pandemic. So when we also look at this, we also see that there's large gaps between the overall unemployment rate and the youth unemployment. For example, in Serbia, which does not have an overall youth unemployment rate very high, but if we compare it to its overall unemployment rate of its population, is about 2.8 times bigger than the overall unemployment rate. Elsewhere, the unemployment rate is around 2.3, similar to the EU. So as we can see from this graph and what we've heard from the remarks, the youth unemployment rates are definitely something that is a development concern and something that needs to be addressed. On this slide, and in the study, you will see sections that look at the impact of COVID-19, and I'm not going to go into details into this, but you will certainly see in the study that COVID has had its impact mitigated by government measures in some economies, to some extent. But nevertheless, we see still in Q4 in certain economies how the youth unemployment rate significantly rises, and so this is a concern. If we move on to the next slide and look at the other side of the equation, so to speak, the employment rates, here, as Secretary General spoke and as some of you heard, we also see that economies were experiencing growth in their economies before the COVID, which translated into the growth of the employment rates and also growth in youth employment rates. We see that, however, we see that this growth is not even. We see that the youth employment growth was slower in certain economies, for example, in Serbia, and uneven in Kosovo. When we look at this slide, what really strikes is that in none of the Western Balkan economies did the youth employment rate exceed 27%, compared to the youth employment rate in the EU of 31%. So we do have this gap. We have this gap with the EU, and we have a really relatively wide range of employment rates across the region, starting with the lowest, about 10.9% in Kosovo, to the highest of 26.3% in Albania. But again, we see that the ratio of the overall employment rate to the youth employment rate is everywhere at least 2 to 1. So we're seeing that youth as a subgroup, a subpopulation group, has a more difficult time accessing the labor market than the overall general population. While we can say that some of these lower employment rates are because youth are in schooling, they're at universities, they're in schools, we will also look into this issue in more detail when we look at the issue of needs, and it's also addressed in our presentation. When we look at the gender gaps, this is something that's really, from a development perspective, something that needs to also be very carefully looked at, because we see that large gender gaps exist in youth employment indicators and across Western Balkan economies. We see that the average gender gap in youth employment rates in the region is 10.3 percentage points. So 10.3 is the gap between young women that are employed in the market and young men that are employed in the market. While this gap, when we compare it to the EU gap, is 4.5%. So it's twice as big of a gender gap in the Western Balkan region than we have it in the EU. And if we look at particular economies, we can see that the highest gender gaps are found in Serbia, around 11.4% points, and North Macedonia, also a relatively high gender gap, 10.8%. The next slide, we are going to look at the youth employment by education. Again, something that is relevant, and in the EU and in most developed economies, as youth labor market participants acquire skill, increase their education, they should be able to find their jobs. They should be able to find jobs easier and get rewarded for those better and higher paid jobs. Unfortunately, that pattern is not present across all Western Balkan economies. We, for example, see that young people in the Western Balkan economies with a medium education level experience greater difficulty in finding work in all regional economies compared to the EU, with a gap of almost 15% point. So those youth who graduate from what we call secondary schools in the region, they have a really difficult time finding a job, in a gap of 15 percentage points compared to the EU peers. We also see among the high-skilled group, this is the youth that have graduated from universities, that the employment rate gap with the EU is almost 12% points. So the gap is, if you are a university graduate in an economy in the Western Balkan region, and if you compare yourself to a youth in any of the EU member states, there's going to be a gap of about 12%. And what we also find, there's differences across economies, across the region. The lowest employment rates for highest educated youth are found in Albania, about 32%, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, 30%, while the highest employment rate for this group is Montenegro, which is 60%, but this is data from before the COVID. So for Bosnia and Herzegovina and Albania, we really need to unpack these issues and understand, why is this happening? Why does higher education does not confer an advantage in the labor market? Is it possibly due to high level of migration of young skilled workers, the brain drain? So these are all important policy considerations, and now we have the data to support and guide the policy decisions. Now, the following slide is something that researchers at today's event will definitely appreciate, but I think it is a very relevant slide for policymakers also, because it shows to us the youth employment rate versus the overall employment rate. And not to get very technical, this was a model that our Professor Bartlett developed, in which he regressed the overall youth employment rate in 6 Western Balkan economies against the overall employment rate, so of the general population. And what does this graph actually tells us? You know, for those of you who are not regression passionists, in a simple way, this graph tells us that there's a strong relationship between the overall employment rate and the youth employment rate. This line that you see explains about 3/4 of variation in youth employment as a function of overall employment, indicating that the part solution to youth unemployment is overall growth of the economies. So all those policy priorities, as Director Kuro and Secretary General talked about, are really translate the policy-driven agenda for economic growth outcomes translates also into youth employment outcomes. But also when we look at this graph, we also see that different economies have different elasticities in terms of their responsiveness to overall growth in employment. So some economies exhibit powerful short-run relationships between the two variables. For these economies, and I will, you can see them on the graph, and they are Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Montenegro. Overall economic growth supercharges short-run increases in youth employment. So what does this really mean? It means that in the good times, jobs will be created for youth, but in the bad times, the youth are going to suffer. So youth employment is going to be very sensitive to changes in economic conditions, with youth to be first laid off in a downturn. And we see this in some of these economies as some of the youth unemployment rates have increased significantly in 2020, particularly in economies dominated by the service sector. This link is weaker in North Macedonia and in Serbia, which in a way has some positives, because in periods of crisis, in periods such as pandemic and economic recession, the effect on youth is less pronounced. And we see this in youth unemployment rates in Serbia and North Macedonia for 2020, which haven't drastically changed. But this also has its downside. This means that in the good sides, when jobs are being created, that the youth employment rates are not increasing as strongly as in other economies. This suggests a need for specific short-run youth employment policies to increase youth participation in overall job creation measures, and which is something which has probably been a factor which has motivated the adoption of a youth guarantee in North Macedonia, and we've seen the success of this adoption of the youth guarantee in North Macedonia. So I hope that you're still with us, that this regression, and maybe I've gone into a lot of technical detail, but there's certainly more detail in the youth study. But more importantly, it will provide important data implications for the policy for the individual economy context. So one of the other things that I have mentioned in my remarks was the youth that are not employed, that are not in education or training, the term that we have in literature, NEETs. And as we know, this is a particularly vulnerable group, and in terms of social capital that Director Curl talked, and the need to reach those that might be marginalized, might not be participating in training, in education, are not taking part in education, are not taking active part in labor markets, additional policy efforts are needed. Secretary General highlighted that the average NEET rate for Western Balkan was 24.2%, and this rate actually increased in 2020. So the pandemic has had an effect. And we see that the rate varies across economies of the region, being the highest in Kosovo at about 37.7% and the lowest in Serbia at 15.9%. But it's interesting, but it's of concern that all the economies have a significantly higher NEET rate than the EU average NEET rate at 11.1%. And we see that the largest fall took place in North Macedonia since 2018, following the introduction of a youth guarantee in that economy. So we see this, you can see on the green line, the North Macedonia drop in 2018, a significant drop in the NEET rate in that economy following the introduction of a youth guarantee. As I've said, the NEET rates have increased in 2020 due to the economic effects of the COVID. There was an average increase of 2.4% across the economies, but we see in some economies this has been substantially higher. For example, in Kosovo, the data that we have, which is doesn't cover the whole year, but covers data up till Q3, the NEET rates have increased for 5% points, and in Montenegro for the whole year about 3.8% points, and both of these are dominated by service sectors. And as we've said, again, really a call for policy action, looking at this looking at this subgroup of overall youth group in our economies. So with this, I will end my part of the presentation, and I will turn to Professor Will Bartlett. And as I've said, the first part of the presentation was meant to set the scene in terms of the data, to share with you some of the statistics, to share with you some of the relationships. Again, the statistics have been largely focused on the Western Balkan comparative statistics, but our study has individual economy annexes and data for all of the Western Balkan 6 economies, and you will have a chance to look at this data and analyze it, and hopefully is a good, useful analytical input. So I'm going to invite Professor Bartlett to take us through the next parts of the presentation, which are really important for understanding the challenges and very importantly, providing some policy recommendations. Thank you. Will, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Amira, and it's a great pleasure to be here with everybody today. I'm going to just run through three main issues. First will be the key challenges faced by young people on the labour markets in the Western Balkans. And second will be the looking at the existing policies, just a quick snapshot of the main features of existing policies for young people on the labour market. And thirdly, looking at what the outlines and nature of a youth guarantee might look like, and the sort of features of that in the region. So start off with looking at the key challenges, and there are basically four of these, but I think it's very important that we consider both, not just the labour market, but the education system as well, because the education system and the labour market are both very closely linked together when it comes to young people, because they're making their first transition from education into employment at this early stage in their lives. So the challenges which have been identified here are basically a summary and a synthesis of the analyses which have been performed by the country experts and which are set out in much greater detail in each of the annexes of each individual economy, which are attached to the main report. So thinking about the education system first, what we see is the weaknesses in the education systems in the region are reflected in the recent PISA results 2018, which were a bit disappointing in relation to the averages of the OECD countries as a whole, and of EU countries also. For example, in Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and North Macedonia, over half of the pupils are unable to achieve level 2 in reading on the PISA test, and this is at the end of the compulsory level of education. In Kosovo, that figure is 3/4. So there's quite a issue around the quality of the compulsory education system, the initial primary education, which needs to be addressed in order to raise the general standards of qualifications throughout the region. Not only that, but many pupils drop out of education after the phase of compulsory education, and this leads to a group of young people who have only very low level of education, which was reflected in some of the slides which Amira presented, which show that they also have very poor labour market outcomes. Second point here is the inadequate work experience opportunities which many school leavers have. Graduates from school and university often lack work experience when they enter the labour market, leading to an so-called experience trap. They can't get hired because they lack experience, and they can't get experience because they haven't been able to get hired to work. So there's an issue there about how do we ensure that young people who are leaving school get at least some work experience and don't get stuck in this neat category. Thirdly, the problem of mismatch. The skills of many graduates from school and university don't match well to the labour market demand. And of course, labour market demands are changing very rapidly due to technological progress and the new internet and computer type of technologies which are being introduced. And those skills are not always taught at school or at university. And when they are taught, they tend to lag behind a little bit on the latest developments quite often. So there's a question of problems of skill mismatch that is prevalent in the region. And many students at higher education, for example, are studying humanities and social sciences subjects, which are not in very high demand on the labour market, and relatively few are studying so-called STEM subjects, the science and technology subjects, which are in greater demand. And in particular with regard to ICT, that's the computer skills, there's an emerging shortage in that field of study. So there's much that can be done on the education side that can help young people when they enter into the labour market. So the youth policies should be not only labour market policies, but they should be coordinated with education policies. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so the next set of challenges is in relation to the job search process. And here we find that there is really inadequate support for the transition from education to work. And this is in relation to the lack of provision of career advice and counselling services, and the scarcity of information on job vacancies. And because of this, many young people rely very much on personal connections to find a job. And of course, the better connected young people often come from wealthier families with strong social connections and strong social capital, which was mentioned earlier. And they tend to find it easier to find a job. And so this leads to perceptions of unfair recruitment practices, which could perhaps be overcome by a greater provision of formal careers advice and counselling and better provision of information on job vacancies for young people. Couple more points here. Some young people prefer security of employment, which is provided by public sector jobs, rather than the more risky private sector jobs, which often don't provide permanent employment opportunities. So that tends to skew the job search process, and young people sort of wait to find a job in the public sector. And so some of the unemployment might be just this waiting aspect. People prefer to wait to find a secure job in the public sector. So that's something which needs to be addressed by improving employment conditions in the private sector to make the two sectors, public and private, similar in their approaches to the issue of employment contracts duration. And then finally, some economies have introduced internship systems which are addressing the question of work experience. But the problem with these internship programs is that they tend to be temporary, low paid or unpaid, and they're not linked to formal education and training components. And they tend to lead young people from one internship to another, giving rise to the criticism of those sorts of programs, that they're a revolving door for young people, which don't lead to good labour market outcomes necessarily, although clearly in some cases they do. So next slide. Okay, so the key challenges on the labour markets, obviously, firstly, is the insufficient number of jobs for young people. Now, this has been, as Mira showed, it's been improving in recent years. There's been a remarkable turnaround in some of the economies which have been able to experience economic growth and have provided jobs for large numbers of people, and young people in particular. But this has come to an end with the COVID crisis and has led to a situation of reversal. But even at the high point, there was a high youth unemployment and low employment rates. So there's a lot that has to be done to create new jobs for young people. Other difficulties on the labour market are the high levels of informality, which prevent young people from accessing social security programs. The prevalence of precarious employment, which means that many young people have temporary jobs, which by their nature come to an end, and they are thrown back onto the unemployment status. And often the high rates of long-term unemployment for some groups of young people are quite severe, and leading to a deterioration in the level of skills over time, and the so-called scarring effect. Many studies have shown that long-term unemployment is very damaging to the prospects for future jobs and for the future wage rates of the young people who have been in long-term unemployment over their lifetime. Young people, as they grow older, this has a lingering effect in lower lifetime incomes and lower lifetime employment opportunities. So next slide. Finally, policy-related factors. There is insufficient targeting of policies on youth employment. Many policies are general active labour market policies rather than having a specific focus on this severe problem of facing young people in the labour market. And in particular, there's an absence and support also for youth entrepreneurship. I mean, many young people who graduate from university in particular have good skills and ideas and are highly motivated to set up their own companies, but there are many obstacles for them to do that. For example, difficulties in accessing business finance, startup finance, absence of incubation space, and a overall inadequate support for and mentoring for those sort of new startups, which are potentially the future of economic growth and the future seeds of economic development in any economy. So that's an important aspect. And then finally, there is often over policy making, there's inadequate consultation with young people, and there are many examples of that that are presented in the individual economy reports in the appendix. Okay, so let's move on to the next section of the presentation. We've looked at the key challenges. Now, a snapshot of the existing labour market policies. First group of policies are policies which affect the transition from education to work. And we can look at this at the different stages of education. So for those who leave after compulsory education, after the end of primary school, or sometimes known as lower secondary education, there's little support available for those young people. These are the so-called early leavers from the education system. I mentioned earlier that these low educated people tend to have very poor labour market outcomes. So there's a very strong case for improving the support given to their transition to work. At the next level of education, medium education level, the transition from upper secondary education, there is variable experience here, depending partly on which type of school that the pupils have been to. So the two main types of school in the region are the gymnasia, which are the more academic schools, and the vocational or technical schools, which are, as the name suggests, dealing more with vocational issues. And the problem here is that for the general schools, there's graduates from general schools often go on to university. The graduates from the vocational schools often go straight into the labour market. But unlike in the past, when the vocational schools had a good linkages with the business sector and with the industrial sector, today those linkages have largely fallen into abeyance, and the pupils who leave vocational schools don't have much support for finding a job. So this is where the impetus comes from in new programs which are being developed to try to link vocational schools to particular industrial companies and often to foreign investors in the region. And so mimicking the German dual education system, some economies have started to introduce so-called dual education, which provides a pathway from vocational school into employment and a partnership between the employers and the schools, which supports that transition and has proved to be very successful. So that's one aspect which could well be developed and spread throughout the region. And then finally, a transition from higher education. Equally here, as we've seen already, there is a problem of mismatch of the skills that are taught in higher education and the needs of the employers. Often there's oversupply from some types of studies, and there's a high level of graduate unemployment. And in addition to that, even the graduates who find a job are often mismatched against the qualifications that they have in the labour market. So in order to overcome this, many or several economies have introduced the internship programs. But as I mentioned already, these are not terribly helpful in terms of providing permanent employment in high-skilled jobs. Okay, next slide. The second group of labour market policies that are in place are the work-based learning policies, and these encompass internships, traineeships, apprenticeships, and informal training. Now, internships we've seen already have been adopted quite widely for university graduates. And traineeships for those with low or medium education tend to be also at low pay, but have been less widely adopted, but have a role to play, certainly, in assisting the transition to work and the improving the skills and the matching of young people to the jobs they're working in. Apprenticeships are the sort of gold standard for work-based learning, and they involve a structured program of training in partnership between employers and education institutions. For the secondary school leavers, dual education systems provide this sort of role, but there's really an absence of tertiary level apprenticeships which will provide structured learning for higher level skills and for promoting the employment of and development of young people in high level skilled jobs. And finally, the informal training, there's quite a lot of this going on, but it tends to be ad hoc with short courses focused mainly on IT skills with little linkage between the training provided and the formal education system. So that's one approach, which is perhaps short-term, benefits, but not necessarily going to give the same long-term benefits as structured apprenticeships. Okay, next slide. The other group of labour market policies are bound up with different types of support for employment. And there are four main modalities here: wage subsidies, self-employment, youth entrepreneurship, and public works. The wage subsidies have been introduced widely as a response to the COVID pandemic, and they've proved to be quite a useful and successful way to preserve jobs, and to not only preserve jobs, but actually they can be used to create jobs by increasing the demand for labour from young people. And I think it would be sensible to continue with the wage subsidies after the COVID pandemic has subsided, hopefully in not too distant future. Self-employment, many young people are keen to set up their own businesses and be independent in their work, but the support for that type of approach to labour market engagement is low and can be further developed. And I've already mentioned that there's little support really for youth entrepreneurship, and there could be more in the way of training and startup grants for young entrepreneurs. And finally, public works is a fairly widespread short-term approach to generating jobs for young people, perhaps more so in some economies than others, but it's basically temporary jobs which are a short-term stopgap, which don't lead to sustainable solutions for young people. Okay, next slide. And here you can see out of all these active labour market policies, as I mentioned earlier, the general picture is one in which there's not much focus on young people, but even the focus that there is, you can see if you look at this over the period of the last decade or so, that the share of young people in participating in active labour market policies has been gradually falling over time, which is really going in the wrong direction. I mean, the big exception here is that sharp upward movement in the line for North Macedonia, and with the introduction of the youth guarantee, you can see that it made a huge difference to the participation of young people in active labour market programs. And this is something which other economies would do well to emulate in order to solve some of the difficulties facing young people in their labour market career. So next slide. So now I'm going to just finish off by talking about the possible design features of youth guarantees which could be introduced in the region. And the first phase is phase 0 is preparatory. There are 4 phases here altogether, but before that, the preparatory phase involving awareness raising, through which is very important, that political leaders will need to promote the concept throughout their stakeholder community. And they'll also have to have political commitment, because this will be quite a change from the norms of practice that have been adopted so far in the approach to young people on the labour market. And one way to ensure the implementation of that is the creation of a task force which would develop operational guidelines and would be chaired by a policy champion who would be a high-level member of the government, who would drive the youth guarantee forward and make sure that it was properly implemented. And it would also be important in this creation of this task force to engage with all the relevant institutions outside the government, including education institutions and youth groups, NGOs, and so on. And it would also be important that the Ministry of Finance was participated in the task force in order to ensure the finance for the measures was available. Okay, so next slide. The first main phase, therefore, of the design of a youth guarantee will be to try to understand better what's going on amongst the young people who are neither in employment nor education or training through specialized surveys which would identify the motivations and difficulties which young people experience. And that would then inform the policy design, which would not be focused solely on labour markets, but which would cut across policy fields, including also education, youth policy, gender equality, housing policy, health policy, and social affairs, because very often the problems facing young people who are excluded from the labour market are multidimensional, and the resolving housing problems or health problems is just as important to ensure their labour market inclusion as specific employment policies, and they all have to be integrated together through not only the public sector activity, but through public-private partnerships involving all relevant actors, including education institutions and NGOs and so on. So next slide. The second phase should involve the outreach to the unregistered NEETs. Part of the NEETs are registered with the public employment services, but quite a large part are unregistered and are in a sort of a no-go zone of not being accessed by the institutions which seek to help young people, and also who are not accessing those institutions. So the outreach strategy will involve the partnerships between the different branches of government, the employment services, the social services, the education and training providers, community groups, and youth NGOs. Next slide. And the key measures to integrate the non-registered NEETs through the outreach program are set out here. So essentially the integrated measures, the individualized case management through partnership between public employment services and centres for social work would be very important. And this can be done by setting up one-stop shops for young people to resolve their multidimensional difficulties. Secondly, training, mentioned this already, but it's important to emphasize the importance of partnership between schools and private businesses who should collaborate to provide training and apprenticeships. And this is already being done partly through dual education, but the apprenticeship type of approach needs to be developed much further. Thirdly, counselling, very important to provide direction and information and support to young people to help them gain a better understanding of the opportunities available to them. And to those who want to move into self-employment or entrepreneurship, the provision of business startup advice and mentoring and startup grants are very important. And then finally, awareness raising through social media, sorts of channels that young people trust and are communicating through is very important to disseminate the knowledge about the opportunities which are available. Next slide. The third phase of the youth guarantee is the operational preparation, and this involves the building of the capacity of the public employment services to deliver counselling and guidance services, and to introduce all the new measures targeted to youth under the youth guarantee. But where this is not possible, perhaps because there's insufficient capacity within public employment services, why not consider contracting out to private providers of guidance and counselling and private providers of training and support for young people. So that's a possibility there where the capacity is limited through not having enough staff, for example, in the public employment service. And we can see this in the next slide, which shows the caseload of the public employment service staff in the different economies. And you can see at the bottom there, the sort of caseload levels in the EU and in neighboring Croatia and Slovenia, around about 140 to 170. And some Western Balkan economies have achieved this, but there are others that have very much heavier caseloads for their staff of the public employment services. And because of the heavy caseload, they will be unlikely to be able to implement a youth guarantee program targeted at young people unless there's either an expansion of their staffing levels by almost double in some cases or more, or alternatively, an approach which would involve contracting out to the private sector would be an option for that. So finally, on the next slide, we see the fourth phase. Once all this preparatory work has been done, the implementation of the youth guarantee, the standard approach here is to implement it in two phases. One would be a pilot program in a limited number of localities to see, what works well in the particular context of each economy and what works less well. So a pilot program to gather information which should be carefully monitored and the results analysed. And then that can be used to refine the design of the youth guarantee before it's rolled out to full implementation in the final phase, with progressive deployment nationwide, ensuring regular monitoring and evaluation of outcomes so that the program can be improved over time as it is implemented. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bartlett. This was a very interesting and a lot of very good recommendations, policy recommendations, and also an overview of good practices. For me, really the highlight on economy-tailored policy roadmaps and the 4 phases plus the 0 phase in terms of introduction of the youth guarantee. What I want to stress is also that in the report and in the 6 annexes that are focused on the 6 Western Balkan economies, we have these roadmaps tailored to the economy context. So we've gone here, Professor Bartlett has gone here through the 4 phases and the 0 phase, but obviously the annexes will have the recommendations tailored to the individual economy context. But I also want to stress that while we hope that this is useful analytical and policy recommendation input, that these roadmaps are useful tools. They cannot and should not and should not prejudice or replace the individual economy implementation plans for the introduction or the enhancement of the youth guarantee. Professor Bartlett also mentioned internships and mixed record of internships in the region. On that note, I have to say that our project, ESSAP, has hosted interns last year and this year, and I hope that this experience has been a positive one for them. We've hosted interns from Albania, from Serbia, from North Macedonia, and I'm today pleased that our interns, who are really an integral part of our team, are today with us. And I'd like to invite Danilo, who is our intern from Serbia, to turn on his camera, say hello to us, say a few words, and give us his perspective of his experience of ESSAP and what he has heard today.
Thank you, Amira. Thank you, and Professor Bartlett, on a truly wonderful presentation. It's really nice to see the data we interns have worked on in the past months come to life. Also, I must say everything that Professor Bartlett talked about is really on point. What struck a nerve with me is really this gap between the skills that are in demand on the market and what we are taught in schools. Anyway, a bit about my experience here. I worked at ESAP for month and a half now, and it's been a truly rewarding experience. I come from Belgrade, Serbia, as Mira pointed out. Now back to data. What I really want to show to everyone is this new tool SF team has worked on. It's basically an interactive tool. Let me share my screen. So this is actually where all the data we've seen comes to life. This tool is not online yet, but I believe soon it will be available to everyone to see. Here I can select the country of preference. For example, I will select Serbia because I come from Serbia. And then, as you can all see, some of the data we talked about, you can see it here as well. Continue, I select my gender. Continue, I'm actively looking for a job. I'm not employed. Yes. Okay, so this is about it. It's a good way, I believe, to show everything we talked about in a different way. Amira, back to you.
Thank you, Danilo, for sharing your experience. I have to say, this is, we hope, an exciting app that will be online. Actually, Danilo played a major role in collecting and testing the data, and I hope this has been a good experience for him. And once it's on our SF webpage, play with the app and see, particularly if you're a young person, how you compare against your peers in EU and in Western Balkan economies, and follow our SF webpage for more. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ognjen.
Thank you, Amira. And now, following the video of our today's conference that you can see, it was really interesting to listen about youth unemployment facts that we are having in the region. And therefore, I would like to thank to you and also Professor for your great presentations, and of course to Danilo, who prepared this infographics video that were very useful, and hopefully soon we will be able it will be able, youth from the region will be able to utilize and actually see and compare the data on this more interactive way. Having in mind that you spoke about different phases of youth guarantee, and having in mind that somehow youth unemployment as the biggest issue or concern that we are having in the region, being also topic of the second thematic youth policy lab under RCC's youth project. For me, it was really interesting to hear about all of these initiatives and actually phases to be done in order to have effective and proper implementation of the scheme in the Western Balkans. And therefore, it is a great pleasure of mine to announce that today we are having the pleasure of having the intervention of our dear partner of the projects, but I would maybe even rather say friend, Mr. Georgi Tasev, Youth and Youth Policies Advisor to the Prime Minister of North Macedonia, who will share the impressions and who will share with us more information about Youth Guarantee Scheme, since the North Macedonia is the first economy in the region that has taken up implementation of the youth guarantee modeled by the EU initiative already back in 2018. So in order to hear the success story of the North Macedonia, Georgi, thank you very much for being with us, and I am passing the floor to you.
Thank you again. Hi to everyone. First of all, I want to thank once again for inviting me to share the positive experience that we have from the implementation of the youth guarantee scheme, and also how the youth guarantee will be implemented in the upcoming period in North Macedonia. Among the many notches that North Macedonia put on its bill in recent years, especially that we became a member of NATO, starting the accession talks with the European Union, there is one for being the first non-European country on introducing fully fledged youth guarantee scheme. Government and their social partners committed to ensure that all young people would receive a good quality offer for employment, continued education, traineeship within 4 months of becoming unemployed or leaving formal education. So the Youth Guarantee is one of the leading European initiatives, and the Republic of North Macedonia is the only country that is not member of the UN start implement this project. It started with the realization in 2018, first as a pilot project in 3 municipalities, then in 2019 expand on the territory of the entire country. And of course, we as a government are really encouraged by the results of the implementation of the Youth Guarantee scheme. For today, speech, I have the recent numbers, including the participants registered in the Youth Guarantee pool, and all other regarding the all numbers we need to present what the Youth Guarantee scheme give us as a country. So we'll start first in the 2019. 20,301 young people are covered by this measure, and every young person within these 4 months after applying to the employment agency gets the opportunity for employment, training, retraining, or internship. And of the number involved, important part is that the 52% are women, encouraging that the measures created are attractive and accountable also for the young girls and the women alike. In 2020, the number in participants registered in the Youth Guarantee schemes is 25,502 persons. And in 2021 till 26th of May is 7,842 persons. And from these numbers, we can see there is a still big interest for the Youth Guarantee, especially of this COVID-19 pandemic. And the important part is that in 2020, the numbers of persons registered in the Youth Guarantee got employed within the 4 months are 7,684 people, which from them almost 50% are women. And the percentage from participants who successfully completed the Youth Guarantee schemes is 35%, which is those considered successful to be implemented in the Youth Guarantee scheme. So as I mentioned, the program will be considered successful as at least 30% of the person involvement in Youth Guarantee scheme finished the program successfully within the period of 4 months, or they are re-employed, reintegrated in educational process, or became part of active employment programs and measures. Also, there is an interesting part which are really proud of we from the government that in 2019 1,457 Roma are included in the Youth Guarantee, which 212 of them are already employed. And also for 2020, they are registered 407 persons, and in 2021 there were 402 persons. When we speak about positive effect that the Youth Guarantee scheme has on vulnerable groups of people such as Roma, and the employment rate is growing in parallel. But you know, when the COVID pandemic started, there was also the unemployment rate is growing. So I think it's the important part is for us institutions to continue working in this direction and to allocate more and more funds for the implementation of such programs. However, the challenges remain to further develop the Youth Guarantee scheme here in the country, especially now in the 2021, because implementation will continue to be implemented on the territory of the Republic of North Macedonia with special emphasis of the NEET youth. And the planned youth guarantee coverage of the participants in the entire territory of the Republic of North Macedonia for this year will be about 10,000 young people. So the young unemployed person who will be included in this youth guarantee will be provided with adequate employment service, which will result in their activation and motivation for getting involved in the labor market through so-called second chance or reintegration in the educational process through short training programs, as well as active employment measures or mediation with the employers. As I mentioned before, the challenges remain to further develop the youth guarantee, like simplify administrative barriers, work on providing the largest possible budget and even greater information, to involve of social partners, and to getting to know young people by what the youth guarantee is and how they can be part of it. Doing this, it's all required to have joint action as a number of government institutions, primarily social partners and civil society organization. And the important part is that the civil society organization are involved in the field activities, especially in fighting NEET youth, introducing them to the youth guarantee and opportunities it offers, and motivating them to join. This is just a presentation of how the youth guarantee scheme is taking part here in North Macedonia. So I think it has a great potential to we as institutions to work hard on this direction and to allocate more and more funds for the implementation of such programs. And I hope the other country from the Western Balkans 6 will follow this positive example for putting the young people to ensure the young people receive good quality offer of employment, continued education, or trainship, just to be prepared for the labor market. Thank you.
Mr. Tasev, thank you very much for sharing the experience and the data from the North Macedonia Youth Guarantee Program. ESSA program is all about regional peer learning and information sharing and regional networks. So I definitely thank you personally for the contribution today. And I think that we all have to learn from the region collectively, and as Secretary General said, not reinvent the wheel, but look at things that have worked. And also very impressive that you've touched in your presentation on vulnerable groups and aspects of gender aspects of the implementation so far, and the importance of the dialogue with the civil societies. So thank you very much this morning actually right now, this afternoon, for joining us and for your valuable insights. And I'm sure they're valued also by our partners, our government partners across Western Balkan 6 economies. And at this point, I'll turn to actually our partners, the government partners across Western Balkan economies who have joined us today, but really have been our partners throughout the whole process of drafting, preparing, and finalizing the study. And when I look into the participant chat box, I see so many familiar names who in the past weeks have given us fantastic feedback, actually pointed out some mistakes in the initial draft, provided wealth of information. And I would like to thank you for all of that. But more importantly, also thank you for the amazing partnership that we have on ESSA. We're privileged to design all our activities and all our work in partnership with our Western Balkan government partners. So I'd like to just give a chance for brief introductions and, as we say, remarks from the different economies. Today with us, I think if I got this right, is Ms. Prodani in Albania, in Tirana. Genta, if you're with us, if you don't mind to turn your camera on. We're going to go in the alphabetic order, so I know that we're going to invite our partners across the economies to address. Now, I don't know on my screen, is Genta turning her camera on? Is she available for comments? I'll give it a few seconds. This is always the awkward side of Zoom, that we don't always know what's happening in the Zoom boxes of all the participants across. But I will definitely.
I can see her name, Amira, on the screen.
Thanks, Sandra. I've seen Genta, but maybe she's having some technical difficulties turning on her camera or addressing the audience. But I'll move on to our partners from Bosnia-Herzegovina. I think I've seen Mr. Nenad Novakovic from Bosnia-Herzegovina. Nenad, do we hear you? Can we see you?
Dobar dan.
Dobar dan.
Ja se izvinjavam odmah, upravo imao sam ovih dana problema sa kamerom. Ja ću prvo da vas pozdravim i morat ću isključiti kameru, pa ću reći par riječi ukoliko nije problem. Izvinjavam se još jednom.
Hvala lijepa. Naravno.
Ja sam, kao što ste rekli, Nenad Novaković, šef odsjeka za rad i zapošljavanje u sektoru za rad, zapošljavanje, socijalnu zaštitu i penzije u Ministarstvu civilnih poslova Bosne i Hercegovine. Želim još jednom da pozdravim sve učesnike sastanka u svoje ime i u ime Ministarstva civilnih poslova Bosne i Hercegovine i da se zahvalim vama, Savjetu za regionalnu saradnju, i to ne samo za organizaciju ovog sastanka na kojem nam se prezentuje studija o zapošljavanju mladih na Zapadnom Balkanu, nego i na svim dosadašnjim naporima, prije svega u okviru regionalnog projekta Platforma za zapošljavanje i socijalna pitanja, kako u prvoj, tako i sada u drugoj fazi, gdje timovi RCC-a i Međunarodne organizacije rada, sa kojom također imamo odličnu dugogodišnju saradnju, zajedno s partnerima iz zemalja Zapadnog Balkana, rade na poboljšanju politika za borbu protiv neprijavljenog rada. S obzirom da se u istraživanju o kojem danas govorimo konstatuje da je stopa nezaposlenosti mladih u Bosni i Hercegovini znatno viša od ukupne stope nezaposlenosti, na primjer u 2019. godini stopa nezaposlenosti mladih od 15 do 24 godine bila je 33,8%, dok se u 2020. godini stopa nezaposlenosti mladih značajno povećala i iznosila je 36,6%. Smatram da su projekti kao što je Omladinska laboratorija Zapadnog Balkana, također projekat RCC-a, od velike važnosti za Bosnu i Hercegovinu. Ministarstvo civilnih poslova Bosne i Hercegovine ima svoje predstavnike i aktivno učestvuje u implementaciji oba navedena projekta, i SAP i Omladinska laboratorija Zapadnog Balkana, kroz koji ćemo, siguran sam, prije svega zahvaljujući entuzijazmu mladih ljudi u Bosni i Hercegovini, predstavnika omladinskih organizacija, postići značajne rezultate i uticati na smanjenje stope nezaposlenosti mladih u zemlji, ali isto tako i uticati na smanjenje odliva mozgova i zapošljavanje u inostranstvu, što je sve veći trend, nažalost, posljednjih godina i što je također konstatovano i u ovoj studiji. Pored navedenog, da informišem i učesnike, i druge učesnike na sastanku, u toku su pripreme za uspostavljanje šeme garancija za mlade u Bosni i Hercegovini, održani su prvi sastanci, a naredni sastanci i treninzi su planirani za mjesec juni ove godine, znači za sljedeći mjesec. Hvala vam velika još jednom i srdačan pozdrav svima.
Dear Nenad, dear Mr. Novakovic, thank you very much for kind words about the partnership. And that is really important, I know, from our ESSA project, but also for the Youth Lab and in overall for RCC. I also thank you for providing us the updates and congratulations. I'm delighted to hear that the plans have started with first working group meetings on the youth guarantee in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Thank you again for being with us today and for a long-standing partnership with RCC and RCC ESSA and RCC Youth Lab. I think we have representatives from Montenegro, from the ministry in Montenegro, Ms. Sučur and Ms. Edina Dešić, with whom we work very closely on this study and who's provided excellent feedback on improving the economy annexes that relate to Montenegro. And I would like to invite them, if I can see them on Zoom and if they are available to address, I can see Edina right now. Okay, great. Thank you, Edina. The floor is over to you.
Thank you, Amira. Poštovane koleginice i kolege, zaista mi je zadovoljstvo da vam se obratim danas pred Ministarstvo ekonomskog razvoja koji je zaduženo za politiku rada i zapošljavanja u vladi Crne Gore. Zahvaljujem se svim kolegama i celokupnom timu koji je radio na izradi ove studije. na jedan vrlo sveobuhvatan način prezentovala politike koje vlade širom Zapadnog Balkana kreiraju u cilju povećanja zaposlenosti mladih u regionu. Kada je u pitanju Crna Gora, vrlo kratko da kažem nešto više odnosno na ono što je evidentno u studiji, a to je da u Crnoj Gori trenutno radimo na izradi nove strategije za mlade i jedan međuresorski konsultativni proces je u toku u cilju uključivanja svih politika koje utiču na mlade u Crnoj Gori sa posebnim akcentom na uključivanje mladih u kreiranju ove strategije. Zakonodavni okvir za politiku mladih je svakako Zakon o mladima koji je stupio na snagu još 2019. godine. Pored toga, u svim opštinama u Crnoj Gori razvijaju se lokalni akcioni planovi za mlade i svakako značajna komponenta u tim akcionim planovima jeste i zapošljavanje mladih u lokalnim sredinama. U Crnoj Gori trenutno radimo na izradi nove nacionalne strategije zapošljavanja i aktivnosti koje se odnose na kreiranju politike zapošljavanja mladih je svakako jedan od prioriteta koji će biti prepoznat i novom nacionalnom strategijom. Ono što je posebno važno naglasiti jeste da mladi zauzimaju značajan procenat u sprovođenju programa aktivne politike zapošljavanja. Tako smo recimo prethodne godine imali skoro 50% učešća mladih u realizaciji ukupnih programa APZ-a i zbog toga bih ovdje zaista uz svo dužno poštovanje napravila jednu konstataciju u odnosu na ono što je gospodin Bertlet malo prije kazao prilikom prezentacije na jednog od pripremljenih slajdova, a to su podaci koji se odnose na učešće mladih u mjerama APZ, zaključno sa 18. godinom. Podaci sa kojima ja raspolažem nisu identični s onim što je prezentovano, tako da bih ponovila, skoro 50% je učešće mladih u mjerama APZ. Pored nacionalnih sredstava koje država izdvaja za aktivne politike zapošljavanja, značajna je podrška i europskih fondova i mi smo izuzetno zahvalni svojim partnerima u Briselu na zaista ogromnoj podršci koju nam pružaju u svim mogućim aspektima, uključujući i ovaj financijski i kao jedan dobar primjer te podrške jeste financiranje grant šeme za samozapošljavanje koji je namijenjen za posebne ciljne grupe mlade žene dugoročno nezaposleni u Crnoj Gori. U toku je implementacija 3. poziva čija je ukupna vrijednost programa preko 3 miliona eura i prilikom prvog poziva učešće mladih je bilo 27%, dok već prethodne godine učešće mladih u dobijenim grantovima za samozapošljavanje je 47,6%, što je izuzetno značajno za ovu populaciju u toku implementacije 3. poziva. Međutim, kad je u pitanju politika mladih, ono što je najznačajnije u ovom trenutku za Crnu Goru jeste svakako garancija za mlade i aktivnosti koje smo preduzeli u cilju uvođenja ovog programa u Crnoj Gori. Kao što ste i upoznati, generalno nakon Sjeverne Makedonije i ostale države regiona polako kreću u implementaciji ovog programa. Mi smo planirali da se ova aktivnost realizuje u saradnji sa Europskom komisijom, naime da se ona finansira iz pretpristupnih fondova, dok smo i preduzeli korake na formiranju radnog tima za uvođenje programa garancije za mlade u Crnoj Gori. Pored predstavnika Ministarstva ekonomskog razvoja koji treba da koordinira ovim procesom, prepoznali smo i i Ministarstvo prosvete, nauke, kulture i sporta, Uprave za sport i mlade, Zavod za zapošljavanje, Ministarstvo financija i socijalnog staranja u dijelu socijalne politike, ali i socijalnih partnera kao što su Unija poslodavaca Crne Gore i Privredna komora Crne Gore, i ono što je posebno važno, putem javnog poziva uključit ćemo i predstavnike nevladinog sektora. Nadamo se da će nam iskustvo koje su imale kolege iz Sjeverne Makedonije biti dragocjen input za što uspješnije sprovođenje ovog programa u Crnoj Gori. Hvala.
Dear Dina, thank you very much. Thank you for this very detailed not presentation, but really remarks, and good luck and congratulations on your efforts on the two strategies, two really key policy documents, the youth strategy and the overall national employment strategy. So you have a year ahead of you where two key policy documents will be developed, and also congratulations on the inclusive approach where the youth are part of the development of the strategy. This is something that is at the core of the Youth Lab project, and also really congratulations and kudos on that approach. I also congratulate you on the efforts on the initial activities related to the youth guarantee implementation in Montenegro, and wish you good luck. And I know that the funding from the European Commission as part of the EU Western Balkan Investment Framework is Pillar 10, and the IPA funding is there. And we've referenced this in our study. Back to the study, I know we've made every effort to get every single number right, but there was a lot of numbers. So, and as you know, we worked closely with you and your teams and corrected information in the study. But as I said at the beginning, we really view the study as a starting analytical point. And the biggest value is exactly the events like this, where we share information, where we learn from each other, where we commit to regional perspectives, also bilateral perspectives, and we can advance opportunities in the region for our youth. So I thank you very much for today's participation. And I also have to thank you for a long-standing partnership with our team on other activities that we're working together with you. Thank you very much, Adina. I know we've heard from Mr. Georgi on the North Macedonia experience, but I know that today also representatives from the Ministry of Labor from North Macedonia are with us. Darko Dohinski. I'm trying to see whether I can see Darko on camera. Yeah, I see Darko.
Yes, I'm here. I hope you can hear me as well.
Yes, I can hear you and we can see you. Greetings in Skopje. Greetings to Skopje. Over to you, Darko. And before you start, again, thank you very much, because you and Mladen have been contributors to the study. I mean, we presented, but really the work has been across the Western Balkan economies. Over to you, Darko.
Thank you very much, Amira. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Darko Dučinski. I'm Deputy Head of the Labor Department here in the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy in North Macedonia. As you all probably know, our ministry and me myself have been heavily involved in the implementation and activities of the ESAP, including the ESAP project, including the first phase of the project, and now, of course, we are sure that we are going to continue to do it. So for the second phase, ESAP 2 project, we have seen a lot of benefits of implementation of this project in the past, and I don't see any kind of reasons for this not to continue in the future, because after all, it's all about sharing experience in the region, sharing knowledge between us countries, which all the studies and our experience show that we are more or less facing the same types of challenges, more or less in the same situation whenever economic situation or labor market, informality in the labor market, in the economy is concerned. As I have already mentioned, we in the ministry are very well heavily involved, let's say, or even coordinating the policies which are related to the to the youths in the labor markets, to the employment of youth people. In that respect, I would also, at the beginning, like to thank you, Amira, to thank Professor Will and the whole team that was participating in drafting this regional study on the youth in the labor market in the region, which I'm sure is going to be quite useful and helpful for all of us. We will be able to draw some lessons, some conclusions from the findings and results published within this study. As you already have mentioned several times, and as our colleague from Macedonia also mentioned very briefly to give you some context, we have been facing the challenges and the unfavorable situation in respect to the youth employment and youth unemployment, of course, in the country. And faced with those challenges, the government of the Republic of North Macedonia has decided to start with the developing of a specific youth employment action plans, which will tackle these particular issues in a more targeted and more specific ways. The first such action plan was prepared in 2020, covering the period until 2015, and then we had the second one, Youth Employment Action Plan, which was for the period 2016 and 2020. At the end of 2017, we have made the first periodic revision of this current Youth Employment Action Plan, and based on this, or I would say as a result of this revision, actually for the first time, the Youth Guarantee as a specific coordinated effort, as a policy or intervention or scheme, as you wish, was introduced as a part of this action plan. Since 2018, we have started with the implementation of this scheme, firstly as a pilot project in 3 municipalities, and then since 2019, we have expanded the program, and now it rolls out throughout the whole country. I'm not going to go into details or the numbers which were already presented. From the point of view of the ministry, which is involved in the drafting the policies, yeah, we are very pleased actually that yours, but also some other independent studies and analysis has already showed that the positive impacts are, I would say, evident from the implementation of this scheme. We have a noticeable decrease in the unemployment rate between youth and increase in the employment rate. Of course, again, the numbers are far from being satisfactory for all of us. There is still a lot of work to be done, but still this is some kind of proof that we are going into the more or less right decision. I'm not sure whether it was mentioned for the purpose of the youth at the labor market policies. We considered as young people those which are unemployed and in the age bracket between 15 and 29 years of age. For the purpose of youth guarantee, the young person is considered between until the age of 29. These are some general remarks. Once again, thanks to the whole team, thanks to all the colleagues that we so far from the other countries had the opportunity to cooperate, and I'm sure we will, as I said, continue in the same manner in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Darko, for these kind words. Thank you for your contribution, as I said, to the study, but also more importantly, thank you for the excellent partnership that we have with you and your team from North Macedonia. Thank you. I'm not sure whether we have representatives from Kosovo, Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. Ms. Podgorica, I think I saw somewhere the icon and registration, but if Ms. Podgorica is available and doesn't have technical problems, I kindly ask you to turn your camera on and address us. If that's not going to be possible, let's then move on to the next economy. I know that today with us, we have representatives from Serbia, from the Ministry of Labor, Employment, Veteran and Social Policies, Ms. Melita Peric.
Hello, everyone. I'm Melita Peric from Ministry of Labor, Employment, Social and Veteran Social Affairs. I'm from Department of International Cooperation, European Projects and European Integration and Projects, and head of group of preparation of project funding by EU and other sources. I'm here to get more information on youth employment and how that can help me in my job relating to preparing projects on youth employment. I can say that our ministry this year adopted the strategy on employment for period 2021-2026 and following action plan for period 2021-2023, in which they enact the measures for improvement of youth employment, and as well as other countries of Western Balkan regions, we are envisaged for economic and investment plan for youth guarantee. So we are in this process, and in our IPA 2020, we have some measures that will contribute to piloting in some municipalities the let's say preparatory measures for the youth guarantee. So that's all for me. Thank you for this study, and it's very useful for us and our ministry, our Department for Labor and Employment had given the comments, so thanks again.
Thank you very much, Melita. Thank you also to your colleagues who've contributed truly to the study and has made it a better, stronger product. Congratulations on the new strategy. Good luck with implementation of policy measures in the strategy, and also good luck and congratulations on inclusion of pilot rollout of the youth guarantee using the IPA funding. And I'm sure in the next events, we will have the opportunities to learn as our partners across Western Balkans progress with their development of their implementation plans and the rollout of the youth guarantee. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to do a final call out for any of the other participants that are from our government partners across Western Balkans. Again, if anybody is here from Albania, doesn't have difficulties addressing the floor is yours. Also, representatives from Kosovo, if you would like to speak, I can also invite you to speak after Albania. And then we also have a representative from the Republika Srpska Ministry of Labor, Ms. Vasic. I know Mr. Nenadic has given comments on behalf of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but again, acknowledge your presence. Thank you. And if you wish to give any remarks. So I'll give a few seconds if anyone takes up the floor. If not, we will take you to the next exciting phase of today's workshop. Ognjen, I think we've got the contributions from our Western Balkan government partners. I again thank them very much for not just today, but work on this study and then the amazing partnership that we have in ESAP. And I turn it over to you, and all of this is about youth. So I'm sure that this wouldn't be complete if we don't hear from you directly.
Thank you, Amira. I would also like to thank to all the government's representatives for their contributions. And additionally, I'm very happy to see that somehow both RCC's projects are cooperating with same people. And I am very happy to see that some of the co-chairs of the Youth Policy Lab, such as Mr. Novakovic, and also members of the regional pool of experts, such as Ms. Karic, but also representatives of Kosovo and Serbia are also giving their valuable contribution to our project. And even though we are a bit late with the agenda, I will not cut off the part dedicated to youth, because this is actually, as you said, Amira, all about young people. And I'm happy that today with us we are having members of the regional pool of experts of the Youth Policy Lab, and some of them are actually working directly on the recommendations that are related to the youth guarantee. But on the other side, some of them are also having very valuable work when it comes to different aspects of youth unemployment. Therefore, I would kindly invite our representatives of the regional pool of experts who are interested maybe to say something or to raise some question, to raise hands so that I can see who is willing to take the floor, and so as that we can initiate the discussion. And in the same time, I apologize maybe for this small delay, and I see that we are having two interested representatives, so three of them. Okay, that's great. So I will give the floor first to Miss Francesca Muco, as I see that she raised the hand. Francesca is our member of the regional pool of experts from Albania. So since maybe we did not have the representative of the government, we are definitely having young expert from Albania to address us. And Francesca, I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Hello to everyone. Thank you again for giving me the floor. I am Francesca Muco, representative of Young Professional Network. Let me first express my gratitude on being here today with you and to have the opportunity to give my remarks. The study findings, I do find it very important, as we often are faced with a lack of credible data about youth in the region in our daily work. So this event is important because it gives us a clear picture of the situation, has gathered multiple stakeholders, and in the meantime offer a year-by-year evaluation of the progress or regress of youth situation in the labor market. I agree with the distinguished panelists who spoke before that implementation of youth guarantee or the flagship number 10 of the economic and investment plan in the Western Balkans is an important mechanism which can impact positively youth situation. Here I can also mention the Planet IPA cross-border program, which will be dedicated only to youth, which is very important for sustainable development of youth organization. So we are welcoming their implementation. Also, I do find very alarming the gender gap mentioned, and I am looking forward to read more about the study findings on this regard and to translate those findings in concrete actions to tackle the situation in our daily work with a special focus on youth on remote and rural areas. Another angle which is very important to be considered when we speak about youth employment is the quality of employment, which is online with one of the European Youth Strategy goals as well. Youth should be aware for their labor rights, as this affects their quality of life and their desire to emigrate. To conclude, I congratulate the Employment and Social Affairs team for their work, Western Balkan Youth Lab for always involving us, and also RCC for this cross-sectoral coordination of projects and studies developed, which always give us a clear overview where is standing our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, for these great and kind words. It is always our pleasure to invite such advocates for youth rights, for gender rights like you are, and thank you for your intervention. Now I see that we are having two more people and actually two co-chairs of the youth policy labs at the economy level, and I'm sure that Nicola will agree. I will give first the floor to Miss Mina Dobrijević from National Youth Council of Serbia, who is in the same time co-chair of the working group at the economy level. Mina, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Ognjen, and thank you to the entire RCC team for organizing this event. And I'm sorry if you don't hear me well, but I recently put on my braces, so I'm having a bit of difficulty when it comes to speaking. So I find this study very relevant, and we will definitely use it in our future work. And I would also like to emphasize that we at the National Youth Council of Serbia have yearly research alternative report on positions and needs of youth, which is very relevant and very important in tackling these issues too. And what I wanted to say that we as a group chose three recommendations, and one of them is related to youth guarantee measures in Serbia. And Mrs. Melita already said that the new strategy for the period of 2021 to 2026 predicts this measure, also does the action plan. But there is also a study that was done by the International Organization of Labor, which says that we, as you mentioned in your research too, that we lack the capacity in terms of organization and staff. So I hope that we will be able to solve this soon. And also, I read in the strategy that they are planning to do a pilot in 3 national employment services. So I salute that, and I hope that we will be able to connect that with our action plan, which we will send very soon to the RCC. We developed it very well, and I would also agree with everything that Francesca said, if I'm not mistaken, related to the gender gap and to the other things related to youth unemployment. And I would like to say that I know that, I mean, I've heard in the consultations that we had that the legal framework will change soon. So we will try to advocate more for quality internships, apprenticeships, traineeships, and we salute the youth guarantee measurements that are about to be introduced here, and we hope that we will be valuable partners in its implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mina. It seems that since Western Balkan Youth Lab project started together with COVID, unfortunately, and we had so many online events, that our young partners are very well experienced with the speech being very short and straight to the point. So I really thank you for your contribution. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Nikola Kandic, co-chair of the working group at in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also representative of the Youth Council of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nikola, I am passing the floor to you, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ognjen, and thanks to RCC for inviting me to this event. This event is really great because it gives us relevant data, as Mina said, for us, for our economies. But also it is connected with some surveys we did in our organizations. And we see unemployment of the youth like one of the biggest problems of the youth in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also youth in Bosnia and Herzegovina say the same, because 74% of the youth in Bosnia and Herzegovina thinks that the unemployment of the youth is our biggest problem. We are worried about this gender gap. And also we are worried about effects of the studying online in the last year. That is maybe not covered by this study, but that's something what worries us like youngsters in Bosnia and Herzegovina. At the level of our working group in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we decided not to go with the youth guarantee like other economies, but we are happy that, for example, in a development strategy of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina for the period 21-27, youth guarantee program is recognized like something which will be the main goal of this strategy, but also in the field of employment of the youth. But also, as Mr. Novakovic said, it is also recognized by the state level. And we are sure that together in projects like this, when youngsters have a opportunity to say what they think about some measures, to include some proposal, we can make Western Balkans a better place for youngsters. And as your motto says, give youth a chance. And you can also show that we are not someone who is just saying we have a problems, but also we can give a lot of proposals how to improve situation. And thanks again.
Thank you, Nicola. Having in mind that today we are having definitely a bigger number of policymakers, three of you really made me proud since, we made sure that youth voices are being heard, and thank you for your contributions and your comments. And maybe this is even a bigger task for Amira and me to somehow work additionally on some joint activities in order to make sure that in some also activities of ESAP, we include our young representatives from the regional pool of experts and find additional spaces and synergies. Also, I was reached by our contact point and also member of the regional pool of experts, policymaker, Mr. Oltion Rumbulaku, Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Education, Sports and Youth of Albania. And having in mind that maybe before we did not have a representative of the government on the session before Amira, I would kindly like to give the floor to Mr. Rumbulaku. Oltion, the floor is yours, and thank you for being with us.
Can you hear me? Yes. So for, let's say, missing a part of this meeting due to a very, let's say, intensive day. But I'm very happy that this, let's say, action by the RCC has now advanced to this level. As we discussed last week, of course, it is very important, let's say, to be oriented to the actions that bring, let's say, more change in our region and are more related to the real needs of the region. Of course, in this case, the youth unemployment, the youth employment in the future is very important. Is cross-sectional. It includes youth education, professional education, of course, inclusiveness, of course, related with, of course, rural youth and migration and everything else. So we should see the region not only as a source of migration, but also as a big possibility for a better labor market in order to have a part of, let's say, of those services or of those goods that are needed for the whole Europe to be produced and to be, let's say, to be possible to be produced in the region. Of course, there are many attempts in this direction. We, as on our side, are trying to make some better connections between the labor market and the educational institutions or graduates, not to lose any more students or high school students in the education fields that will not bring a good value for our economies and our societies. We should know that we all in the region have the same, let's say, problem about the demographics. We will have less youngsters in the upcoming years. So every youngster, every young person is very important, and everyone should be educated, should be let's say, serviced in the best. Thank you again, Ognian.
Thank you, Oltion. Thank you very much for your kind words. Somehow we are reaching to the end of the conference, and before giving the floor to Amira to wrap up today's meeting, I would like just to ask, do we have maybe some additional questions from participants at this stage? Or any comments, questions, so that we make sure that we address all of them? I will do the same as Amira, wait a couple of seconds, and if not.
And while we wait, if you have additional questions, you can post those in the chat. Just to cover, I'm sorry that in the chat there was some questions about the PowerPoints, the studies, and thanks to our great comms team in ESAP, you got the answers, but go visit the ESAP webpage. It's an exciting webpage lot of data. I've heard a lot of youth passionate about data, which is actually great. And ESSAP webpage will bring you tons of data that you can explore. And then you also see our app there. So I'm sorry, there was a question from Mina. Mina, is your hand up for a question?
Yeah, I had a comment more because I was going through the phases that your colleague presented before, and I wanted to say that I see us as a working group and us as a National Youth Council of Serbia mostly in the raising awareness campaign and later in the creation of everything that is supposed to happen, because I believe that we are the best platform for communication and for mapping the needs of youth that you can use. So feel free to.
Exactly, Nina, and thank you so much for saying that, because I mean that's the whole point of the including young people when it comes to designing, implementing, and evaluating policies that are related to young people, and therefore we see this crucial role of young people when it comes to promotion, but also when it comes to designing the very policies. So Amira, I apologize, but now we are having also Miss Snežana Klašnja, who is a representative of the Ministry of Youth and Sport of Serbia, and who is also co-chair of the working group in Serbia together with Mina. So I would like to give the floor to Miss Klašnja. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want only to thanks to all presenters to this event, and to say that really this working group co-chaired by youth representatives and the representatives of the government are functioning very well, and we would like that all decisions will be done on the same way. So good luck to everyone, and give the chance to the young people.
Thank you, Snežana, so much. It's so encouraging for us in the Youth Lab and in RCC to hear that, even though we are already familiar that the process in Serbia is going very well when it comes to the regional recommendations and their implementation at the economy level, and especially in regards to the youth guarantee. So if there are no any additional questions or comments, I would like to give the floor to Amira to address us all, since we approach the very end of the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ognjen, very much for the floor. I think I stand, this was for me, was really a very exciting workshop. I don't want to say conference, because I learned a lot and it was interactive, and I feel we learned a lot from each other, and we certainly exceeded the time slot that we have planned, but I think that reflects the richness of the discussion, and it reflects the inclusivity, because what we really wanted to stress, this is not just about data, this is not just about our policy recommendations, but it is about dialogue with youth, dialogue with Western government partners, and it's about creating opportunities, better opportunities for youth in the region with youth, not just for youth, but with youth. And I stand definitely in a very unfortunate position between you and lunch, because I see it's 1:45 and people are probably hungry now. So again, I'm in a really dangerous spot after exceeding 15 minutes of our timeline, and all of us looking forward to a lunch. And we know how lunch is important in the Western Balkans. But I don't want to end here. Before giving chance to another person, a really important person on our team, another intern that we have, Rovena, and I want to assure you that at least in ESSAP, we make sure that the gender gap is not there when we give our opportunities. So I know you're all eager to go for lunch, but let's hear from Rovena, a few remarks, and then we'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amira. I will try to be brief. My name is Rovena. I am from Albania, and I'm currently completing my degree at the London School of Economics. And I'm here today because of my academic interest on policies and developments in the Western Balkan regions. From what we all heard, being a young female in the Western Balkans isn't necessarily the best combination in terms of labor market. However, this hasn't demotivated me to look after opportunities, to be engaged with my country and the region. That's why I am now engaged in doing this internship with the ESAP team. To be honest, before joining the team, I wasn't very aware of what was happening in the region, but I'm really happy I joined because I understood the work that is being done for employment there. Despite that the present is not so bright in terms of youth labor market in the Western Balkans, I am positive towards what governments and RCC, with the support of the EU as well, are doing in the region, and motivates me to seek a job there after finishing my study. Because between the choice of living in a non-EU country now, like the United Kingdom, compared to living in a potential candidate country to join the EU, probably the opportunities there will be higher and better in the near future. During the internship with the ESAP, I have for sure enhanced my research skills, and I believe that the very good reputation that RCC has in the region will be a very good trampoline for me in the labor market there. So to this end, I think that programs like internships, traineeships, and every professional engagement program will help youth on their future employment. Therefore, I would encourage every young person here and beyond in the Western Balkans to keep an eye on opportunities in the regional level as well, along with their efforts to find opportunities in their home country. And lastly, I want to thank RCC and the sub team for this meeting. And I really hope that the next meeting that might bring us together, we will be making jokes on today's data, hoping that the situation has improved meanwhile. Thank you, Amira.
Thank you, Rovena. One of the smartest things is to end the event with youth voices. It ends with optimism, it ends with action. So I am not going to take away from that optimism that Rovena brought, other than to thank you all. I'd first like to thank all speakers or presenters. I would like to thank youth representatives. I would like to thank government partners. I would like to thank our translators. I know that some of you had a really difficult time, those who were translating me. I speak very fast, and there were some speakers who also spoke fast. So thank you very much for bringing the voice and the content in all the languages of the Western Balkans. And finally, last but certainly not least, I would like to thank our partners from the Western Balkan Youth Lab Project, Ognjen, and then last but certainly again not least, my own team, ESAP2 team. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay well, stay engaged. Follow us on our ESAP webpage, on our social media platforms, and I hope to see you soon. Hopefully in person, but definitely on some online platforms. Thank you very much. Thank you for making this event an exciting event for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.